Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and today we got a very interesting guest and one that we're going to learn a lot from because something's going on that few Americans are aware of, and that is that President Obama is set to sign a UN arms treaty allowing Iran basically to disarm Americans. Now, that statement alone ought to just put you on edge, but we're going to get the details on this. I'm very honored to have with us today the Honorable Bob Beauprez. He's a former member of Congress and currently the editor-in-chief of A Line of Sight, an online policy resource. Prior to that, and prior to serving in Congress, he's a dairy farmer, yay for the farmers, and a banker. And what a delight to have you with us, Bob. Are you in Colorado today?
I am.
All right.
I am. It's a beautiful day here.
All right. Nice to have you with us. Well, give us an update on this treaty. Where is it before we go back and find out how we got this far?
Well, it's a very, very important issue because it goes right at American sovereignty, at our individual liberty and freedom, and one of the most foundational ones, that of our right to arm ourselves, especially as individuals. And it would cede, if this treaty went forward, it would cede our sovereignty and our individual freedom to, of all places, the United Nations. And don't forget, I know you won't, Perry, and don't forget, some of the nations that are members of the UN are not necessarily our friends. Syria is a member. Iran is a member. Russia is a member. I mean, this is crazy. It's actually being discussed, deliberated this month, the month of July, in the UN. People like Wayne LaPierre, who I have a lot of respect for, is there monitoring it. But the Obama administration, counter to what the Bush administration did, the Obama administration gave a go-ahead for discussions about this, and that makes many of us very, very nervous. The Bush administration said no. The United States of America is a sovereign nation. We actually believe all nations should be sovereign nations and control their own laws, especially relative to arming not only their citizens, but importantly, Perry, this treaty, as they're discussing and as many of the nations in the UN would want, it would give veto power to the UN and thus any member nation of the UN to decide what nations could have arms trade agreements one with another. Now think about that.
Wow.
They could veto us helping our ally Israel with military arming. They could veto an arms shipment to Taiwan. China might like that idea quite a bit, don't you think?
Wow.
Well, this is an enormously dangerous treaty, and while the Obama administration says, look, we're just having discussions, we're not going to go too far, we've got, they call it red lines, we've got lots of red lines we won't cross. We've seen too many times with this administration that what they say one time is not what they mean another.
All right, Bob, give us a little bit of a civic lesson here. Before the president could even sign a treaty, he has to get through the Senate by 2/3. And is it at that level?
Well, it's close to that level. The UN hasn't come forward with a treaty yet, but insiders are telling us that the Obama administration, if they can get some of what they want, they're likely to sign the treaty, which means then it would go to the United States Senate. Thankfully, we do have that safeguard. In fact, 2/3 of the Senate has to ratify a treaty before it can become the law of the land. At the moment, there's at least 58 senators that are on public record having said that they want no part of that. So if folks are really concerned about this, my guess is you're not going to change the mind of the Obama administration very much. But I think it's high time and an appropriate time to let your senators know you don't like this idea at all. Another thing, Perry, that it would do is open to foreign nations the gun ownership records of private citizens like myself, right, or yourself. Right. I don't necessarily want Mahmoud Ahmadinejad to know whether or not I've got a shotgun or I don't, or whether I'm carrying a concealed handgun or I'm not. That is none of his business. But this is what's really behind many of the nations in the UN that are weaker nations, but when they're aligned together, they feel that they can tweak the nose, and worse than that, they can assault the freedoms of the great United States of America.
Concealed gun permits would be basically obsolete.
Absolutely. And part of the sinister thinking behind this is that, I mean, some of the radicals believe that it's people that cause problems, you know, and that they've got to control the people. And of course, that's so inherent in the central planning kind of thought process of many around the world, too many in the United States these days. But it's very foreign to our sense of individual liberty, individual freedom. This treaty would basically, some think, in short order, outlaw the ownership of guns by individuals, and it would only be governments that would have any right at all to not only own weapons, military weapons, but even private handguns.
All right, so citizens should be contacting the U.S. senators, in this case Wyden and Merkley. You should be emailing their offices and let them know that you oppose this proposed treaty. Even if the president signs it, it has to go to the Senate for ratification, and hopefully we got enough to stop it there.
Well, and a legitimate concern, Perry, if I might, is that once the cat's out of the bag, once they start these discussions, too often it leads to eventually an agreement. So yeah, this thing needs to be nipped in the bud.
All right. Do you see any link here between this kind of a move and what now certainly seems to be the case of the reasoning behind Fast and Furious? Is this all part of this administration's attempt to go after the Second Amendment?
You've connected the dots very well, Perry. Absolutely. You should, at a minimum, you should be very, very suspicious. I'm more than suspicious. I think it's part of that same thought process that somehow handguns need to be regulated and governments need to be in the middle of it, and only governments need to be making decisions, not private individuals. I mean, this is so foreign, Perry, so antithetical to everything we hold dear, or we always have held dear in the United States of America about individual rights. And that's why many of us are extremely troubled by this.
Congressman, this I don't even like going down this road, but I think it needs to be put on the table. If this saw the light of day, and God forbid that it would, but if it saw the light of day, wouldn't this be a modern day civil war in this country?
Well, some are wondering what will be the line that gets crossed eventually, where people actually rise up and say enough. I mean, our founding documents refer to it, that people have every right, free people have every right, that when government becomes too obtrusive, too obsessive, too overwhelming, and infringes on their individual liberty and freedom, free people have a right to overthrow that government and establish a new one. I hope and pray that we don't see another revolution in this country. I hope and pray we don't see another civil war. But this administration is pushing the boundaries like none I think we've ever seen. If I can, I'll mention, I wrote a book a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Two important things I think in there to our discussion today. I did call for a revolution, but one at the ballot box, where people take back this great republic, a government of, by, and for the people. The other thing I called for is for us to get out of the UN.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed to say, but while I was in Congress, yes, I on many occasions voted to continue our participation and funding in the UN. I no longer believe that that's a worthwhile or appropriate effort. I think it's a corrupt organization. It's an anti-American organization. The largest single block of that organization are the 57 members of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. It's theater that we fund for an anti-American, anti-freedom cause. I think we ought to get out of it. So I think we are on extremely important and perilous times, not only for the United States of America, but for the state of the world.
What other nations would sign such a treaty?
Oh, I think you'd see all kinds of the Islamic nations signing the treaty. I think you'd see Venezuela sign the treaty. I think you'd see a lot of the socialist-leaning nations in Latin America. I think much of Europe would sign that treaty, all thinking that somehow it weakens the United States of America. And that's why they would sign the treaty, and gives them some sort of control and veto over what the United States of America can do, not only relative to our own citizenry. Their real objective would be limiting our ability to arm and support our allies, particularly Israel. I mean, when was there last a vote, Perry, in the UN regarding Israel that didn't go against Israel? When was the U.S. last aligned in support of Israel? I mean, that organization is as committed to the extinguishing of Israel almost as Iran is and Syria.
Well, I'm just like you, stunned. I would hope that we get on top of this and stay on top of this. If there is an outcry, we can't stop the president from signing it, but we can stop the Congress from okaying it. But even if the president signed it, does that open the door, like you said earlier? I mean, how can we stop the president from signing this thing?
Well, and we have seen too many times with this president that the Constitution and the rule of law and the consent of the governed doesn't mean anything.
Right.
He's picking and choosing which laws he wants to defend and which ones he wants to ignore. He is making executive orders that, frankly, I think are way beyond his boundaries of authority within the Constitution. So yeah, I'm concerned whenever I see an administration, and particularly this administration, that is exceeding its authority, that's having dialogue, in this case, with the member nations of the UN that I think are counter to our freedom and our sovereignty. That should be absolutely sacred. This president took an oath to protect and defend the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Same one I took. I don't think he's doing that.
What damage could he do if he becomes a lame duck president with things like this? I mean, he could go into kamikaze mode and do all kinds of stuff through executive order, couldn't he?
With absolutely no limitation, no thought of restraint by another election cycle to go through. I am enormously fearful of what a second Obama term would look like, and not to mention the obvious. If he gets a few more appointments to the Supreme Court, we could be dealing with that for a very, very long time. But his willingness to ignore the limits of executive power, I think, are just absolutely astounding.
Well, Congressman, thank you. Thank you for your passion. Where can people get a copy of your book?
At my website, Bob Beauprez, which is BEAUPREZ.com. There's a link. Amazon's got it. Most bookstores have it. You go to alineofsight.com, my website.
Okay, thank you so much. God bless you, my friend. Keep up the good work, and we'll get you back as this thing progresses a little bit.
Thank you, Perry.